Hello, everyone. I am Ben Johnson, and this is the Perpetual Chess Podcast. Perpetual Chess is a weekly chess interview show where we talk with accomplished chess players, authors, and personalities about their lives, their careers, and how to improve at chess. Perpetual Chess is brought to you through the generosity of its Patreon and PayPal supporters and by Chessable.com. Welcome back, everyone, to Chess Books Recaptured. Hopefully, those of you listening know by now that this is a monthly break from your typical interview where I and a friend, in this case, a good friend, get together and recap a chess book, sometimes of great renown, sometimes of less renown. But this one is of great renown, one of the true classics in the chess world, My 60 Memorable Games by Bobby Fischer. And I could not be more excited. Other than Bobby Fischer himself, I cannot think of who I would rather have discussing this with me. It is one of my oldest friends in the chess world, not old in age, but I've known him for the longest. You've probably heard his name in the closing credits because who knows? Is he an IM elect? Is he just a FIDE master? He has 3 IM norms, but never made the rating. Now he's busy being a lawyer and a dad and stuff like that. But he has deigned to join us this month to discuss My 60 Memorable Games. And without further ado, let's bring in Donny Ariel. Donny, how are you?
Good. Thank you so much, Ben. It's wonderful to be on your show. I think this is maybe the number one chess podcast in the world. I think it has to be. So I'm really glad to be here, and I'd love to talk about the book and anything else you'd like to talk about.
Excellent. Super excited. And Donny, of course, you picked this book. I mean, obviously, people are clamoring to discuss this book, but once you planted your flag, I'm going to give it to a good friend of mine. So what meaning does My 60 Memorable Games have for you, Donny?
Well, for me personally, when I started playing chess in the early 90s, it was the book that contributed the most, I think, to my development as a chess player. I gained a lot of rating points studying it very, very carefully. And also, it was significant because I don't know how it is now when you're starting to play chess, but certainly then, Fischer was like a god in the background of the chess world. And there were many people at the chess club who had known him or, some quite well. I mean, Lombardi or even Zuckerman, both of them are quoted in this book. Their analysis is quoted, or Asa Hoffman. There were many people like that. But for me, Fischer was this god. And even when he returned in 1992, I wasn't even that interested in that match because it was almost like it wasn't the real Fischer. The real Fischer was this mythic lone genius conquering the world. And that's it. So even to this day, I think what's valuable about the book is both, if you're interested in Fischer, then it's sort of definitely a must read, but it's also an excellent game collection. And if you like that kind of book, then I think it's certainly worth reading. And I'm sure we'll get into more details about that.
Yeah, an absolute classic. And we should mention Donny joining us from Brooklyn, New York, not all that far from 560 Lincoln Place, where Fischer grew up. So yeah, he definitely casts a long shadow in New York in particular. So how have you been by his place? I know we've discussed this at some point, Donny. Did you ever stalk the house that Fischer grew up in?
I did actually take a look at it. You still look quite close. And it's pretty nondescript apartment building. Recently, in preparing for this interview, I also reread Profile of a Prodigy by Frank Brady, which is a biography. And they mentioned a couple of local addresses. So I looked them all up on Google Maps, and they're certainly all quite close. I don't think there's anything to commemorate Fischer there. I don't think there's any plaques or anything. But it's certainly very interesting to see where he lived.
Yeah, of course, commemorating Fischer is unfortunately less of an automatic thing than it might have been under different circumstances, given the stuff he said at the end of his life and the unfortunate views that he espoused and mental illness that he ultimately developed. But sure. Yeah, I mean, we can separate the art from the artist for the most part.
Yeah, I think it's good to take a moment to just address the fact that, certainly my view, I don't want to speak for you, is that obviously Fischer was somewhat mentally ill. I'm not a psychologist, so I'm not going to opine on it too much. But for me, I think it's certainly okay to remember his chess and remember him. I don't think we need to cancel him for
Yeah,
to use
I mean,
and it's also impossible to do. I mean, when I used to teach chess to little kids, I would sometimes think about whether it was okay I was showing these games, and no kid ever asked me, no one ever said anything. But what I was prepared to say was, I was going to tell the kids, like, have any of you ever been sick? And of course, they would all say yes. They've had tons of illnesses. Kids are sick all the time. And then I would explain, well, some people can be sick in the head. So I just thought it was impossible to teach chess in the United States without mentioning Fischer. And it certainly, it's not like it just like a movie director. You're like, oh, you just don't watch his movies. I mean, the guy was champion of the world. And I think the gap between him and number two, I looked at the ratings today. I think it was 125 points after the 1972 match. I don't think there's been a gap like that since then. I mean, nothing close to that.
Yeah, it just boggles the mind. And just to give a little more info about my own history with this book, it's not all that different than Donny's, because it was a formative book for me as well. I was just showing Donny my dog-eared descriptive notation copy that I poured over as a teenager. And Donny, to his credit, is a couple years younger than me, but we're around the same age. And, even in the early 90s, around the time that both of us were digging into this book, I mean, chess information was just so much more scarce. So this book was just like an absolute gold mine. And we're going to share some quotes from some people who were alive when the book came out in a minute. But I also just want to mention a few people. Obviously, I think everyone listening to the show has probably heard of this book. It's been recommended on the show many times by I Am David Pruce. When I played the old I Am Mark Dvoretsky interview with Fred Wilson, of course, Dvoretsky himself recommended it. GM Matthew Sadler and Natasha Regan mentioned it. Adult Improver Stjepan Tomic, Stuart Rachels, R.B. Ramesh. And of course, there's some crazy, not crazy in the actual crazy sense, but just effusive quotes about it by quite well-known chess players such as Garry Kasparov, who said in the New York Review of Books that his book, 60 Most Memorable, I always say most, his 60 Memorable Games was one of his earliest and most treasured chess possessions. And Alex Fishbein raised the bar even more. I want to give a shout out to American Chess Magazine. They did a commemorative issue of 60 Memorable Games, although it was really more about Fischer generally. But Fishbein wrote a little column about Fischer's endgames, in which he said, I consider this book to be the most profound chess book of all time. So we'll talk more about contextualizing it, Donny, but do you agree with GM Fishbein's statement?
It's certainly a strong statement. It's definitely an excellent book. Compared to, I've read a lot of game collections. That was the kind of book that I like to study. And I think that, as an aside, I think that's good advice for players trying to improve, that they should study the kind of things that they like. Sort of like exercise. The best kind of exercise is the kind that you like, because you're actually going to do it. So if I compare it to Alekhine's game collection, though, I read the Nun version, which was very good, or 100 Selected Games, or Tal's book. They're all very good. I really, really like this one. I think that Fischer gives a more accurate impression than a lot of writers about what it's actually like to play the game. So he will often say he didn't see one move ahead. Like, he didn't see the move the guy's about to play, or he didn't see against Geller. The point of Geller's defense is Fischer's variation that he's counting on is going to hang checkmate, right. A very simple checkmate. So the book is littered with comments like that, and you really get the feel of what it's like to play. I think a little more than if I could contrast it with, let's say, Kasparov's books, which are, I certainly have nothing bad to say about them. But if you're trying to read those books, it's a little bit heavy in the analysis department. If you're trying to actually get to the end of the game, which to me was always what felt like the accomplishment was, okay, I played through this one game today. It's going to be a little tough to make it through all those variations. And that's, it's extremely valuable. Don't get me wrong, you would learn a ton if you did that, but you're not going to be calculating all those variations at the board. You're going to be doing your best. And then you're going to be saying things like Fischer, like, I hope this was going to work out because I thought it was good. But you're certainly not going to be sure in any respect. And the games are very, very good. And also, Fischer had a style that is, I think, a lot easier to emulate, which is not to say that it's easy to play as well as him. But if you were to look, and it's true about Magnus Carlsen too, maybe Karpov or somebody, if you compare them to Kasparov or Alekhine, like when I study Alekhine's games, I thought they were very, very impressive. But it was very obvious to me I'm never going to play a game in my life like any of these games. But if you look at the games in my 16 memorable games, there are a lot of slugfests, but there are also a lot of games where not much happens, where it's like an end game. They move around for a while, and then it's over. Fischer wins. And it's I think that's easier to try to play like that than it is to play like really wild tactics.
Yeah, it's a really good point. And yeah, it's hard for me to say. I mean, I don't have it as in quite the same hollowed breath that GM Fishbein does. I had written to shout out again to Fred Wilson, who's been on the show and has a bookstore, rare and used chess books in Union Square that you guys should visit if you're ever in New York or if you live in New York. So I had mentioned to Fred that in revisiting this book for the first time in a long time, I wasn't totally blown away. And it's not a negative thing. It's just that chess has changed. But I agree with you that the level of analysis to me is right. He admits his errors, but we should also point out, I mean, he has like staggeringly complex lines sometimes that he's really just saying what he saw at the board. And obviously, I mean, sometimes an engine can poke holes in it, but sometimes it's like exactly right, holds up perfectly to a modern engine. So I feel like it's an amazing book. Whether it's the best ever, who's to say?
Yeah,
but well worth your time.
It's true that a lot of the notes, if you were to put them in an engine, which I played over all the games with an engine in preparation for this podcast, a lot of the notes are wrong, as I think any human analysis would be. But I do think people should keep in mind that it's not really that, in my opinion, it's not that significant if the notes are wrong. I mean, if you're talking about an opening position, then it definitely, like, you better have the analysis right. But I think what you really learn from is understanding the point of Fischer's variations. So if there's some small error there somewhere, you're not going to get that exact position. What's going to help you is that you understood the variations he gave. You understood also all the sub variations, which a lot of them are going to be 1 and 2 move tactics, maybe 3 move tactics. And that's what most games are decided by. That's what most games in this book are decided by. So certainly that's what most games, basically a practice at all levels is decided by ultimately, even though at the GM level, they may have fallen for some 2 mover because they were under some other tremendous pressure. So I still think the notes are very, very good. But it is true, of course, especially in the sharper games, that the analysis isn't perfect. Like against Olafsson, he was a lot worse for more of the time than he thought. I mean, you could give a lot of examples like that. But to me, it doesn't detract very, very much from the book. I don't know. Do you think that someone should read it with a computer? I think no, but I would be curious what you think, Ben.
I'm such a bad student when it comes to this stuff. Like, I just want to check the computer when I'm reading it, you know? I think in a perfect world, you probably shouldn't. I mean, especially if you're into chess history, like if you just want to know what the person was thinking and you're still going to get 80% correct analysis. And so I think probably not, but I was sometimes had a super strong engine when I was looking at it. Certainly a few games I looked on my computer with stronger engines. Sometimes I looked, sometimes I would be reading it and playing through the moves on my phone, which we'll talk about when we talk about what edition we used. And in those cases, sometimes I would have a computer and sometimes I wouldn't. But generally, I mean, obviously I interview strong players every week, and some of them say never ever have the computer on, and some of them say it's fine. So, what difference does it make what my opinion is?
Yeah, that's true. I think that well, the other thing is, Fischer sometimes gives very light notes. Like he might just give some variation, say white's winning here. And I think for those trying to improve, they should definitely, when you're actually studying the game, they should make sure that they agree with everything he says, or they have exhausted their analytical ability to the extent that they can say, I just don't agree, but it's not because I didn't spend the time. Because I think that is where a lot of the learning, when you study a game collection, comes from, is that the author gives a lot of variations and you play them over and understand them. But there will also be a lot of things that look wrong to you, like this ending is winning, or there's just a tremendous number of things like that. I mean, I remember I stopped reading this book, The Art of Chess Analysis by Timon, because I heard it was such amazing analysis. And then on the first page, I thought what he said was totally wrong. Now, in retrospect, probably I was wrong if I had to guess, but that's more of an extreme example.
Well, also, you're a pretty strong player. I mean, I don't know what your level was when you read Timon's book, but
yeah, I was, I don't know, 23 or 2400 maybe. But in this book, there are, as you said, there are some very complicated notes. Like, for example, you mentioned Botvinnik, that he gives a lot of variations, but a lot of the times the variations are not going to be like that. It's going to be much, much simpler. And if you don't understand the variation, almost always, for example, against Rossolimo, he says no credit for other moves.
Oh yeah, at the end.
So,
yeah.
And his point is, if you read the book, you'll see the position is that if you make another move, there's going to be a discovery and you lose your queen, right? So obviously, when you're reading that, you don't just say, "Oh, no credit for other." You have to understand what he's saying. Now, that's a more obvious example, but you get examples all the time where he'll say one side is better or not, and it will really behoove you to exhaust the position yourself. Someone pointed this out to me when I was a little boy, maybe 12 years old, at the Manhattan Chess Club, sitting and reading this book. The dominant player in the club at the time was Kamran Shirazi, who was an international master from Iran, and he told me, you're not supposed to just not, because I was barely looking at the board. I was like making the moves. He's like, you're not supposed to just make the moves. You need to think about what you're doing. Right. So I think that's maybe an obvious point, but one worth making.
Yeah, and I just wanted to throw in, like you mentioned, reading something and thinking it's wrong. I think the more common experience for people might be just reading something and being like, well, I have no idea, like just not seeing why they're saying what they're saying. So he might say, okay, you do this, this, and this, and now white is winning. And you're like, well, why? But it still gets to the same solution, which is that you just have to keep asking yourself questions until you feel like you have a better sense, or like you say, at some point you just have to give up. Life goes on, and
then you could ask the computer, maybe.
Yeah, exactly. But have an active, inquisitive mindset when you're reading through the book.
For sure.
So I wanted to share a couple, because this book, it's so hard to do justice for us, born in the 1970s after Fischer had disappeared. For us, of course, we appreciate the legend of Fischer, having grown up in the US, but we didn't live through it. And I thought it would be cool to just get a couple quotes about what it was like to live through it when this book came out, because there's a storied history of sort of will they or won't they with this book coming out. I mean, Fischer obviously generally had a lot of indecision about doing, whether he's going to play this match, whether he's going to show up for whatever tournament, so on and so forth.
Bit of an understatement. But.
Exactly. And this book was no exception. I mean, it was in the works for many, many years, and it underwent many different titles. For a long time, it had 52 games, and it was close to publication at some point. And then he changed his mind, and he wasn't going to publish it at all because he felt like it revealed too much of his thinking. And then it was finally released in 1969. According to Larry Evans, who is his good friend, and we should say the person who helped him with the book and wrote the quite memorable forewords, and I'm sure we'll discuss the forewords at some point. But according to Larry Evans, he finally decided to publish it in 1969 because here's the quote. He said he was feeling depressed about the world and felt that there would be a nuclear holocaust soon. He felt he should enjoy whatever money he could get from it before it was too late. So that was the reason that Fischer, at least according to one of his good friends, Larry Evans, finally released the book in 1969. So a lot of back and forth, but to bring it back to people's reaction. So I was just wondering, what's it like? First of all, it's very rare that a sitting world number one writes a book explaining their thoughts. I mean, shout out to my friends at Chessable. Magnus just put out his course going through 5 of his games, but it's not really the same now where you have the post-game interviews and everyone's watching online. Back then, things were much more shrouded in mystery, and I think that people were a lot less polished. And plus, it's just writing a book has such a degree of dedication, and information was so scarce then, that the idea that this person who's, American icon, best player in the world, is going to write a book explaining his thoughts when there's you might be able to get 5 chess books at the library if you're lucky, and, they might be for beginners. So I have one quote from Fred Wilson, because I wanted to reach out to him to ask what it was like. And here's Fred. He said, I began playing in 1961, so this book came out in 69. He said, in 1969, I was married with kids, working 6 days a week and watching my rating slip from 2189 to 2149 when I even had time to play, and probably not able to study the games well, but I did read it from cover to cover. By now, I've done so 4 or 5 times. And then he said some stuff criticizing my critiques, which my critiques are very mild, so I don't want to emphasize them so much.
Let's hear him, man.
Well, no, I already mentioned just generally. Well, actually,
he didn't agree with what you've said so far.
Yeah, I mean, he didn't agree with. I just like more personal recollection, and I had mentioned that in an email. But but in thinking about it more, I mean, it's not Fischer's personality. You know, he was a guarded person, so he
gives person. I mean, he talked from the perspective of chess. He gives personal insights, but not about his like personal emotional state too. I mean, he does say he panicked against Petrosian and stuff like that, but he's not going to say, "Oh, I was disappointed. I started thinking about my mother." That's not going to be.
And something like the life and games of Mikhail Tal, I always just like a little more narrative thrown in. That's just the way I'm wired. But again, that's just not this book. It's not. It really shouldn't even be taken as a critique of this book. It's just that's not what he set out to write. So anyway, that was Fred's perspective, and then Fred also emailed a couple other people, and this is from a gentleman by the name of Richard Reich, who I don't know, but I really enjoyed his quote, which is, he said, "I remembered how excited I was as a high school student when I learned that Bobby was writing a book of his games. At that time, I was not aware of either his earlier book nor of Bobby Fischer Teaches Chess," which is its own conversation. He says, "I remember calling a bookstore in a neighboring town to pre-order it, how much I nagged my mother to drive me there to pick it up when it was in stock. Reading this book alone, plus playing perhaps 20 or 30 tournament games, got me from 1100 to 1700. In those days, books on chess were very hard to find, even Reinfeld tomes. I lived in a chess desert where the best player was a Class B player who did not deign to play with patzers like me." And this is at a time when Fischer's already in 69, he was 30 points higher rated than Spassky, number one in the world. At first, I was thinking maybe it's the only time a sitting number one wrote a book, but Fred Wilson pointed out Test of Time by Kasparov might be another example. But anyway, I mean, it's just cool to think about the idea that like this mythical figure comes down and publishes this book.
I mean, you're calling him the world number one, which I guess you're saying is based on the rating. And I'm not disagreeing with that. I mean, when it came out, I think it's quite reasonable to use the rating. But one thing I definitely notice now reading it rather than when I read it the first time is that he was not world champion, right, when he wrote this book. And it's certainly, arguable whether he was world number one, maybe the last few games in the book. It's interesting that for the vast majority of the games, he's clearly not the world number one. And, there's a tendency to think Fischer was sort of destined to win every game, but he was also the worse player than a lot of the players at the beginning of the book when he's playing the absolute world elite, and he's just trying to break into that group. But, okay, I'm not going to quibble too much. I mean, Kasparov wrote a book about his, his first world championship match, which was one of my first books that I studied. It's probably not an appropriate book to read at that point. I didn't make it all the way through, but I had the two sets. I mean, this really makes me sound like a dinosaur. When you read a book with a chess set, I know a lot of people probably have never done that. It's very hard to get back to the original position if there's no diagram. So you sometimes have to have one analysis board and one for the actual game if you really want to get into Kasparov's notes, which are quite extensive.
That's cool. That takes me back. And yeah, we should mention the games covered are from 1957 to 1967. So it doesn't, like Donnie says, it doesn't include the games from the peak of his powers, the famous run from 70 to 72, where he just started absolutely destroying everyone, culminating in winning the world championship. So it doesn't cover absolute peak Fischer in terms of his ability, but you can see the progression through the course of the book. But it's a valid point about like him not being necessarily the best player.
Now he definitely, I think certainly it comes out. I think he definitely, thought he was the best player in the world. Certainly, well, I think most of the listeners are probably familiar with Fischer's career, but just in a couple of sentences, Fischer was U.S. champion at 14, and then he became a candidate for the world championship at 15, and then they had a candidates tournament where he made a minus score and Tal made a big plus score. This is in 1959. Now, at that time, listen, I know there's a lot of Fischer experts. I certainly can't say what Fischer was feeling, but it seems like this was his first time playing and he hadn't won the interzonal. He managed to qualify. So at that point, okay, he didn't win. I guess life goes on. But then in 1962, he won the interzonal 2.5 points ahead of Geller and Petrosian. And then he's playing in the Curacao Candidates Tournament. So I think at that point, he must have thought that he was going to be world champion. I mean, he crushed the interzonal. But of course, an interzonal is a qualifying tournament. I don't know if anyone plays poker, but it's like a satellite. Everyone's just trying to get to the next level. So then in Curacao, he made an even score, 14-14. Petrosian was made 17.5 and won. And Karras and Geller were half a point behind. And I guess this is sort of what really starts Fischer like dropping out of the chess world over and over again, which is probably not the subject of this podcast, to go blow. But the point is, at that point in 1962, and about 2/3 of the games are through 1962, he was definitely not world champion. But I don't think it's it's not the end of the world. If you played like Fischer did even in 1958, I think for most of the listeners, you'd be doing just fine. But it is interesting to notice the psychological background of each game, right? When he's playing Petrosian in Portoroz, he's not playing him as I'm definitely the world champion and you're, I'm going to beat you. He's definitely the underdog for all his, hubris, which is certainly he was entitled to be. I don't know, Lombardi, who sometimes would speak. I took some lessons from Lombardi, who sometimes talk about Fischer. It just reminded me of him saying something to the effect of once that it was like, if you want to be a huge egomaniac, but it's fine. And I don't really disagree with that in Fischer's case. If you are this great champion, then I think it's fine to have a little bit of hubris. It was certainly deserved in his case, I guess is what I'm trying to say in a long way.
Yeah, and I just want to throw in, just for context, I mean, he was really young, too. I mean, the years you mentioned, he's like 1920. He's born in 1943.
Oh, yeah.
So just like on the and of course, this is, held the youngest U.S. master title for many years, youngest grandmaster, etc. So he was on a trajectory where it was reasonable to extrapolate that he might be a world champion. It wasn't.
Oh, definitely, yeah.
But you mentioning, I've mentioned before, I met Lombardi once or twice, but not a ton. But you having grown up in New York, you have any Lombardi Fischer stories that are that you could share off the top of your head, Donnie?
I guess I don't know. He would occasionally just mention him, but it wasn't. I guess nothing really that juicy. He once claimed to have shown him H3 against the Najdorf. Which, I don't think that would be super surprising. And there's I think at least 2 games in this book with H3 against the Najdorf. And he once just talked about how they studied, like, it was some incredible number of games in one night. It was like maybe 250 games that they played over, something like that. And just the usual stuff. One of Lombardi's biggest pieces of advice to me, and I think probably to all his students, I only took, was only a student for a short period, but it definitely had a big impact on me, was never offer or accept draws. And that draws are sort of a bad thing. They're like an occupational hazard of chess that you don't have in most other sports. I mean, it can be very tempting to be like, let's just make a draw, but that's really pretty terrible for your chess. So he thought, the Russians were very afraid to see how Fischer played very, very accurately, that they couldn't find mistakes in his games, and that he was so driven to win. I think, though, of course, you can take it to an extreme. And I noticed that in my own games, I would sometimes, or often frequently, I would say, if I saw a variation was going to be a draw, I would just refuse to play that variation. But as Fischer points out in the game, one of the games against, I think the game against Gligerich called Castling Into It, he quotes Tarasha as saying, playing for the loss at some point. And that's definitely something that I suffer from badly, and it's to be avoided. And I think you see that same thing, by the way, in the first game against Spassky in their match, as we were discussing earlier. He took this poison pawn on h2. That's another example of playing for the loss. So, Fischer's maximalist approach, it did have some downsides. So I guess the advice for the listeners is, sometimes the game's a draw.
Yeah,
you don't want to throw away the half points because you're so intent on winning.
Yeah, but I get Lombardi's general advice because, tournament chess, especially classical chess, when you have to sit there and fester, it's tense. So when someone offers a draw and it feels marginal, or if you think about offering a draw, it's like, I could be in the bar right now. Like,
Sure.
why am I doing this to myself?
But I mean, the thing is, you have to ask, why are they offering a draw? Like a very common time where you get offered a draw is when you're playing a higher rated player and you have a better position. So this happened to me, many, many, many times. And almost all those games I lost, actually.
Yeah, it happened to me too.
I can't recall a game that I won. I mean, I remember Sagalchik offered me a draw and I lost. I remember Michael Muliar offered me a draw and I said no and I lost. So it's not that you're definitely going to win the game, but if you want to improve at chess, you have to have this experience of, playing against tough competition. You can't just agree to a draw when you get to that point. There's a cliche, the hardest thing to win is a one game, and you need practice. You need practice.
Yeah, no, it's good advice. I wanted to throw in a couple notes on the formatting of this book, because you mentioned the old school story of the two chess sets, one for analysis, one for the actual position of the game. And both you and I, through the course of rereading this in the past month, we're texting back and forth, like, because neither of us, I'm, 98% sure there's no ebook. The book is published by Batsford. It's not on Forward Chess. It's not on any of the other apps. Chessable doesn't have it, unfortunately. So we were looking for the optimal way, and at first I was all excited because I found this. Someone has posted on LiChess one of the LiChess studies where you can just play through the 60 games. Of course, if you go to chessgames.com, I think there's a page where they list the 60 games. So the games aren't hard to find, but in terms of the optimal way to play through it, especially if you're not using one chess set, let alone two, it can be a little tricky. I think you and I both ended up settling on the solution of, when we're playing it through, like on a tablet or on our phone, we just input the moves ourselves, because that way it's you can have the engine on, which you couldn't on the LiChess if you need it. Obviously not always have the engine on, but otherwise, if you're in the middle of a game and that you're looking at and you just want to check something on the engine, with the LiChess study there was no option. So
I just imported I would import the PGN file to LiChess. The guy that entered the notes, actually, maybe we should just ask him, because it seemed like it was just a setting that he had to give permission for the computer to be on. And I can't imagine why he wouldn't want that to be the case. I don't know if people does anyone read chess books with a chess set anymore? Because I'm not exactly sure that it's the same. If you're just playing over the variations, then it's the same thing. You could just play them over on the computer. But when it comes to now, you're going to provide your analysis of his analysis. Are you going to do it to the same extent if you're not moving around the pieces with your fingers? I'm not sure, but certainly maybe some people are comfortable doing that. But I would just emphasize again, at the risk of repeating myself, that you definitely want to be in a position to do that.
Yeah. And I think there definitely are people who get out the chess set. I know Jesse Cry, Grandmaster Jesse Cry, is a big advocate of sort of the analog methods, just to sort of feel it in your bones, which I get. But Jesse has kids, you and I have kids, Donnie. I just wouldn't be able to read a chess book if I did that. Like my daughter's going to come prancing through the middle of the board, so. But
it should be said that my reading, and I'm guessing yours too, from looking at your Faber and Favor, that beautiful black edition that seems very, very worn that you showed me, is, when I say like now that I played through the games, what I mean is like I made the moves and I looked at the notes, but that's a very different thing than, you're really studying this book because you're going to be the champion, right? Like, if you're going to do that, then you really have to, every game should take a few hours, I would think, at least.
Yeah, it's very true. And I do one of these podcasts every month, so I couldn't give it definitely couldn't give it the attention I did the first time around, which is a bummer, but still greatly enjoyed it. So Donnie, I think we're going to dig even deeper into the book, but first let's take a break and hear from Chessable. If, like a lot of chess fans, you have an insatiable appetite for all things Bobby Fischer, then you should definitely go to Chessable.com and check out My Great Predecessors Part 4. Of course, this is part of Garry Kasparov's landmark series, and this one is predominantly about Bobby Fischer himself. So it goes through his life and legacy, the rise and triumph of Bobby Fischer, goes through lots of his games, but of course with an emphasis on the key moments and the motifs that you should know, with Chessable's MoveTrainer technology to make sure that you remember the patterns that Bobby Fischer unveiled. It's a lot of fun, so go to Chessable.com and check out My Great Predecessors Part 4, as well as everything else that they have to offer. All right, and we are back, and as promised, we are ready to dig even deeper into this book, which begins, I think, as always, we like to read some sort of snippet from the beginning to give you a taste for the book. With this one, there's very little proper prose other than Larry Evans, of course, his famous introductions, which I think I'm a bigger fan of than Donnie's, but we'll get to that. But first, I just want to take you to the first 2 paragraphs of the book from the preface, just to sort of set the scene from Grandmaster Fischer. He says, the 60 games annotated in this volume were all played during 1957 through 67, and with the exceptions of numbers 44 and 50, under strict tournament conditions. The notes frequently include references to additional games, occasionally presenting them in full. An interested reader will find 34 of my earlier efforts in Bobby Fischer's Games of Chess, Simon & Schuster, 1959. All of the 60 here offered contained for me something memorable and exciting, even the 3 losses. I've tried to be both candid and precise in my elucidations in the hope that they would offer insights into chess that would lead to fuller understanding and better play. Finally, I wish to express my gratitude to Larry Evans, friend and colleague, for his invaluable aid in the preparation of this text, as well as for his lucid introductions. Robert J. Fischer, New York City. And then they have a quote that on the next page that says, on the chessboard, lies and hypocrisy do not survive long. The creative combination lays bare the presumption of a lie. The merciless fact, culminating in a checkmate, contradicts the hypocrite. That's from world champion Emmanuel Lasker.
I understand Larry Evans liked that quote quite a bit and that he included it in some other books.
Okay. So do you think he picked that quote?
I strongly suspect it. Actually, this national master, Nick Conicello, told this to me maybe 30 years, a long time ago. And so I assume he was right because he generally knew that kind of thing, that this quote was always included. And I guess he was using it as evidence that Evans had more, Evans, I guess, said he was just the editor, basically, but I suspect that he had a little bit more to do with the prose in the games than maybe maybe he was admitting, because some of the vocabulary and just the way things are put is a bit more formal, even than Fischer when he was writing something formal. There's not that many other examples of formal writing, but for example, like a protest letter or something like that.
Just for example.
For example. I mean, I happen to, because I read Profile of a Prodigy, they give some stuff like that in full. So not that that's a bad thing. I mean, that's an editor certainly very valuable. I know you love the introductions, and I like them. I find it a little weird, though, sort of for the reason you mentioned, that they're written in the third person, and it's just a little strange to me before every game to have this like third person view when it's Fischer's book. One thing I do like a lot is that every game has a name, which, because, you could say to someone in the chess world, when the Maroczy didn't bind, and they know you mean this game against Lombardi from, I think it's the 60-61 US Chess Championship, but you don't have to say all those things. You can just give the name from the book. And that's like a cute shorthand. But the story of the game, it's always a little artificial to tell the story of a game of chess, in my opinion. Sometimes it's true, everything was going along normally and there was some colossal blunder. But most of the time, it's, back and forth quite a bit. So,
yeah, I hear you. I just feel like people need help. Everyone loves a story. They need an anchor. I need an anchor. I mean, Larry Evans was a grandmaster. I'm a decent player, but like for me, it just helps to have these tent poles. Granted, it influences me some, but I also think he was just a good writer. I mean, the intros are very poetic. So I get what you're saying, but one could easily skip them if they want. And for someone like me, if I just sort of die, like I already said that I wish that there were more sort of narrative in the book generally. So without that snippet, if it was just straight up games, and of course with Fischer's analysis, to me it wouldn't be as memorable.
Fair enough. I mean, I'm not, I've read them all multiple times, so I don't want to give the impression that I don't enjoy reading them.
It's just a personal preference thing. So, it's hard to even put this book into themes. I mean, of course, we could talk about Fischer's playing style. You already mentioned a little bit that, he was pretty versatile. I mean, there, as you mentioned, there's lots of slugfests. I love the openings that are in this book. I'm not sure if you share that level of enthusiasm about sort of some redundancy with Najdorfs and King's
Well,
Indians.
that was I have that as a quibble with the book, that actually it doesn't bother me that much, because first of all, I like playing the white side of the Ruy Lopez quite a bit. Maybe because this was one of my formative books. I'm like very happy to play against the Chigorin variation. I don't know if that's the right. The Knight A5.
Yeah.
But the Najdorfs, certainly those are going to be exciting games. And so if you're an E4 player, then it's great. I mean, and if you play the King's Indian defense and the Grunfeld defense, then that's great. I mean, I could see there are people out there, who they like to play over games from the openings they play. So if you're someone like that, and you want to see a lot of Queen's Gambit declines, there are a couple, I think, like against Shevsky, maybe he's on the black side of one. But obviously this is not going to be the book for you then. Because this is before, I guess goes hand in hand with the fact that these are not from Fischer's final spurt to becoming world champion, where I think probably most listeners know he crushed this interzonal in Mallorca, then he beat Taimanov 6-0, he beat Larson 6-0, beat Petrosian 6.5, 2.5, and then I think the score against Spassky is 12.5, 8.5, something like that. But the point I'm making is that in that last period, he played tons of new openings. At this point, his opening repertoire is still quite narrow. Although for most people, I mean, I don't know why you would have a broad opening repertoire unless you're like already quite a good chess player. I mean, I would think you'd want to play basically the same openings every game, especially because your opponents it's very unlikely to be preparing for you.
Yeah, it seems tough in this day and age. It's hard enough to keep track of like one repertoire, let alone multiple.
Yeah. Although I should say as a disclaimer that for relative to my playing strength, I know less about like the opening than almost anybody in the world. Like, I don't know. I basically have no opening repertoire, but and I think that the value of the opening is overemphasized in general, and it's especially overemphasized now for sure. I mean, they make it sound like, if you were to read anything, like everyone has these incredible opening preparation. I'm sure that is true at some level, but it just can't be true at an amateur level. I mean, because it's just, there's no way you could memorize all these lines. I mean, we know some people in common. I guess I won't, subject him to being named in this podcast, but we know one German grandmaster who basically told me he just remembers every single thing. He just remembers it. And then I saw him, he was on a Grandmaster's Fiddler, said there was a time in his life when if you had told him that it was possible that he could forget something that he knew, he would have thought that you were insane. So this is a long way of saying you should have a narrow opening repertoire, in Donny Ariel's opinion, unless you're already quite an accomplished chess player, and you're gonna do a lot better. So if you want to copy Fischer's openings, okay, the Najdorf is a bit sharp, but other than that, I'd say definitely go for it.
Yeah, certainly your understanding of the Ruy Lopez in particular. The Najdorf, the theory and the ideas have changed a lot over time. He was trotting out the Sozin, which, people still play, but is not as popular, although he did try some sidelines. One thing I like, so he does have little bits of personality that shine through. First of all, he's got sort of like the New York staccato in some of his comments, but I also like that on the few occasions when he does play a different opening, he'll always give himself an exclam, like he plays the Nimzo Indian, to get someone off guard. Like 2 E6 gets an exclam. He plays the exchange Roy for a change, and like Bishop to XC6 exclam. So,
yeah. He uses the exclamation mark actually differently than other chess, right? He uses it, of course, for a good move, but he also uses it exactly as you're saying, like sort of just to like give an emphasis. There's actually even one time where it's some active move, like some active break. He gives it an exclamation mark, and then the note is more prudent would have been to do this other thing.
Right. Yeah.
But what he's saying is like full steam ahead.
Yeah, basically it's like if he was playing over the moves, he would bang that move.
Yeah,
is what it means.
Exactly. And he also gives a lot of variations where he says sharper is, which I found very interesting because he's not saying better is. He's just saying like you could play more aggressively, and that it's sort of a stylistic choice, whether you do that or not. But But yeah, that's funny with his exclams. And he gives a few double exclams. Those are definitely very good moves when he gives it a double exclam.
Okay, we are back from unprecedented technical problems. Donnie's internet went out.
Don't blame me, Ben. It is my fault, but
it's that New York internet. As a former resident, I remember it well. And yeah, it's just kaput. So we decided to finish on Skype. So I apologize if the sound is slightly different, but Donnie is loud and clear, and we're just going to power through and resume with quotes. So we had just been discussing how Fischer has a unique language, very sort of New York style brief writing in terms of describing things, and we wanted to share a few quotes. I'll go first. I actually may end up sharing Donnie's quotes as well, since he's going analog here. So number one, of course, we haven't talked much about individual games that much yet. One game that obviously gets a lot of mention is the Fischer-Larsen game, the famous Yugoslav attack, Sicilian Dragon, that just iconic H4, H5. So one quote, of course, is, "He won't get a second chance to snap off the bishop. Now I felt the game was in the bag if I didn't botch it. I'd won dozens of Skittles games in analogous positions and had it down to a science. Pry open the H file, sack, mate." So for those of you familiar with the game, that's that position where his bishop is on D5 and the knight can trade for it, and he retreats to B3, and he just proclaims the game over and then proceeds to end it. And Donnie, I know that's a game that you've mentioned to me over the years. What do you have anything to add about it?
Sure. I mean, I used to show that game to kids a lot. And there are a few games in the book that are good for that. I mean, certainly Fischer Fine is another one that comes to mind because it's so short. But the Larsen game is also very good because it's a Yugoslav attack against the dragon, as you said. But it's maybe clearer than like some modern examples. I also like in that game he quotes Tarash as saying, "Before the ending, the gods have placed the middle game." And the context is he's talking about if the bishop on b3 is captured, he's going to capture away from the center. C takes B instead of taking with the A pawn. And he says that formation is very, very safe for the king, even though the ending is losing. You have to survive to get to the ending. And I just found that very interesting always, that he thinks that it's so safe. I mean, I guess he's right. I mean, it's certainly true in chess that, these pawn weaknesses are not, or, having a bad pawn structure is not going to kill you as long as you mate the guy. So yeah, that is a terrific game.
Yeah, it's a super fun game. Probably one of the more famous games from this book. Donnie, what do you think are the most famous games in this book?
So I was thinking about that. I think the most famous game is probably the game against, there's two. I think the game against Robert Byrne from the 1963-1964 U.S. Championship, where it looks like, probably most people know this game. It looks like Fischer is going to give two pieces for a rook, but then he actually takes the bishop on G2, and then it turns out it's winning because he has a light square bishop that has no opposing bishop to challenge it. That game won a Brilliancy Prize, and I think the title of that game is More Witchcraft Than Chess. More Witchcraft Than God, I'm probably I should have had it in front of me here. They just called it the Brilliancy Prize. I think it's a quote in the introduction, which I guess I claimed I don't like, but maybe I do, since I remember all these years later that someone commenting said it was more witchcraft than chess because the position is very, very symmetrical, and white played very, very quietly, and Fischer somehow whips up an unstoppable attack. And I guess the other game, so I think the moves of that game are the most famous. I think the game against Botvinnik is also an extremely famous game from the Olympiad, where Fischer was winning, for him, he had a winning advantage, right? He's a lot better, but Botvinnik managed to make a draw. If I'm recalling the analysis correctly and the computer's analysis, I think Fischer had a good night against a relatively bad bishop, and I think once they got into the pure rook ending, it was a lot better for Botvinnik. But I want to be clear that I'm not talking in absolutes, because obviously a lot of people have analyzed this. Famously Kasparov analyzed it also, and now we have the computer. But in practical terms, I think that was basically what happened. There's certainly a lot of very famous games. I mean, there's this game Fischer-Tal from his first candidates, where it's Sozin against the Najdorf, and Fischer's like almost winning, and then he plays the wrong move, and then he's worse down a piece, and then he loses. I think that those are probably the most famous. Do you have any other that come to mind, Ben?
Those, I think you pretty much covered them. I mean, one thing we should note is the game of the century, quote unquote, is not in this book. The other famous Fischer Burn game. But bringing it back to Fischer-Botvinnik.
The brother, though.
Yeah, good point. Bringing it back to Fischer-Botvinnik, I kind of went down a rabbit hole in terms of just reading about it. There's been so much. So in addition to Kasparov writing about it, Carsten Mueller recently wrote something on ChessBase about it. You know, to this day, people are still debating at what points was he winning the end game, at what points wasn't he. And of course, this game was adjourned at a certain point, and Fischer's up all night studying it. I mean, and then studying it days later. And there's, you know, he was just really disappointed that he lost that game. He talked a lot of trash about Botvinnik. So it's just a very storied game in chess history, because he always said that he could beat Botvinnik, and this was his one chance on board one of the Olympiad. They weren't even sure if Botvinnik was going to show up to play him because the Soviets were so much stronger than the Russians. So there's so many little subplots, and there's a quote that Carsten Mueller had in his ChessBase article of a letter that Fischer wrote to Zuckerman, Zuck the book, his friend, regarding this game, which I think gets to what you were saying about what his writing style was like, as opposed to what some of the potentially edited or dare someone say ghostwritten parts by Evans would say, although certainly some of the wording obviously is very Fischer, but some of it isn't. Anyway, here's what he wrote to Zuckerman about that game against Botvinnik. The first half of the tournament I played well, but in the second half I really potsed up one game after another. Botvinnik could have safely resigned against me, but I fell into this obvious silly cheapo you can imagine. He looked like he was dying all through the game. He was gasping, turning colors, and looked like he was ready to be carried out on a stretcher. And then he has in all caps, but when I blundered and he caught me in his trap, he was the old Botvinnik again. He buffed out his chess, strode away from the table as if he were a giant, etc. So just great color, and shout out to Agadmater. He has a recap, of course, of this iconic game, and he mentioned that there's a 20-second video of the very end of the game, which I watched as well. You can't totally see the tears in his eyes, but apparently Botvinnik wrote somewhere that Fischer had tears in his eyes when he walked away. I mean, no one loved it and wanted it more than Fischer, so it's totally believable that after a game of that magnitude, he would react that way.
I think, Frank Brady wrote that Botvinnik, or he quoted Botvinnik as saying that drawing that game brought him more pleasure than winning the return match against Tull. So, it was a significant game for both of them. Yeah,
that's a great quote. Do you want me to read one of your quotes, Donny? Because I know that you're forced to. Your notes were on your phone, and now you're on your phone. You want me to hop into your next one?
I have one in front of me against, I might be mispronouncing his name, Zabo. At the end of the game, it's basically a short game where Fischer's on the black side of the King's Indian, and White makes one really bad anti-positional move, and he ends up losing because of it very quickly. And the quote is, "White's pawns fall like ripe apples. I'll never forget the disgusted look on Zabo's face as he took his king and just sort of shoved it gently to the center of the board, indicating his intention to resign." So I like this because, as a chess player, I guess people have different motivations. And, Fischer famously said, "I want to crush their ego." And that appealed to me as a young man, definitely. And you see it there that he seems to take a bit of delight. I would say, I mean, it's understated the way it's written, but in the fact that this guy has been like totally crushed,
Yeah, and there's hints of that throughout. And to get back to what I was saying about my, again, extremely mild critique of this book is I just want more, because I mean, I'll never understand playing like him or the feeling of being there. But when he writes about the feeling, or when any top player writes about the feeling of being there or talks about the feeling of being there, they can sort of put me in a place where when they calculate, 20 moves ahead flawlessly, it's not as human to me. So I love the human side of the stories, and those little nuggets are great. And there are, to be fair, a fair amount of them, of the sort of classic Fischer shoot from the hip descriptions in this book, but it's just I want even more. And my next quote also is one of these quotes. So it's from his game against Petrosian, and he says, right after I made this move, Petrosian offered a draw. I was ready to accept, but Tal happened to be standing there at that instant, hovering anxiously, since a drawn result would practically clinch first place for him. So I refused, not because I thought White had anything in this position, but because I didn't want to give Tal the satisfaction. And he goes on to win this game. This is in Bled 1961. He's only 18 years old. I think you mentioned earlier that he finished second to Tal in this tournament, but was in contention till the end, beat out Petrosian, Karras, Gligorich, etc. So amazing result, but I love the feeling there.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree.
And there's something I've in an endgame, I feel like Tal and Fischer were known to have a decent relationship later in life, but in Endgame, when Fischer was first coming on the scene, Frank Brady sort of describes Fischer haranguing him at times, like at tournaments, because he was sort of unkempt in the way that he dressed. So I can just sort of imagine.
You mean Fischer haranguing Tal, or
no, Tal haranguing Fischer, because Fischer's younger and he's the outsider, and so it's just kind of, and Tal's like got along with everyone. So it's kind of easy to see. And you can sort of get those undertones when he says he didn't want to give Tal the satisfaction, but it's not as explicit. I want to see him say like, I wanted to crush him, like I couldn't stand him, that sort of thing, even if later their relationship changed.
I mean, Tal did beat him, I think 4-0 in his first candidates match.
Yeah.
And, famously signed an autograph, signed his own name and signed Fischer's name, pointing out that he crushed the guy so badly. So, I mean, I'm sure Fischer found that very humiliating to lose 4-0. But, what can you do? Also, they say in, was it Curacao? I guess it was the next candidates in Curacao where Tal had to go to the hospital. And apparently Fischer was the only person who visited him there. And there's some photographs of Fischer playing chess with him in the hospital. I've always assumed they were from there. So, yeah, I think they did probably have. They were probably friendly. I would think. I mean, obviously Fischer's sort of a unique individual, but that says something.
Yeah, and sure. Fischer was just so young at the time. I mean, I'm sure things changed over the years.
I mean, that's another. I mean, every game against Tal in this book is very famous, but obviously Fischer finally manages to beat him, where Tal makes a mistake in the opening, a little inaccuracy, and then Fischer's finally able to drive it home, and you can tell he's very, very happy about that.
Yeah,
and there's all these other games where he's drawing and where he loses a game.
Yeah, and Fischer was just grinding so hard on the openings generally. I mean, that's one area where he, all the work that he put in his obsession of reading every book under the sun, learning to read in Russian so that he could read chess books. That was an area that really shone through. So that
was an interesting practical observation. So Tal makes this move that is objectively not a good move, and Fischer's looking at him, and Fischer says he can't tell if Tal is sure he doesn't know, is Tal panicking already? Does Tal know that he's blundered? He says he's not sure if Tal realizes if he has been careless or not. It's not so obvious, right? It's not like a one-move blunder. It turns out he did make a mistake. But I just like the way that scene looks.
So your next quote, Donny, is the scorpion sting at the tail at the end of the combination versus Lombardi with Bishop H4 check.
Yeah, I always like that. I think about that sometimes, when I'm playing. I mean, it's a position where there's, combination, and basically, not to give all the details, it's going to be a little much, but there's a knight on d5 for white, and there's a bishop on e7. And if it's white's turn, he can play knight takes e7 check, and he's going to be winning, or at least that much the better. But it's black's turn, and he can play bishop h4 check, and you have to see that move way, way, way in advance. So I don't know if there's a practical lesson there, except that, you have to see to the end, which is not, it's not maybe such a great insight. But that was a good game too. I mean, Lombardi made I guess with Fischer, I think uses the phrase a gross blunder more than once.
Yeah.
And they got an ending where it looked to me like probably Lombardi's able to draw. He's down the exchange for a pawn, but his bishop is very solid. It seems like maybe Fischer would win. Who am I to say the game's a draw? But Lombardi made this mistake where it allows Fischer to get into king and pawn ending, which is winning by force. So that was a very good game too. When the Maroc didn't bind.
Yeah, yeah.
I know nowadays nobody fears Moroxy Binds, but for most of chess history, they did.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and that gets me thinking when you mentioned that the combination occurred at the tail end. Earlier when you were saying, like, even at the grandmaster level, a lot of games are decided by combinations. I mean, yes, they're decided by combinations, but often that's what it is like someone just saw one move farther, but you don't realize it until the end, like as in the Fischer-Geller loss that we'll be discussing in a bit. So yeah, it's a common theme and definitely a great line to keep in mind. I got one more quote that I have to share. I mean, well, two more, because we have to mention best by test. I love that Fischer's like an unabashed E4 fanboy. Like, he just has utter disdain for other moves. Like, I mean, it takes me to like a more innocent time, like it reminds me of like when you're kids, you like to argue about like, who's the best basketball player or something, or who's the greatest chess player of all time, or whatever it may be.
Sure.
And then as you get older, it's like, who cares? People have different opinions. We've all come to accept that. But Fischer, like, first of all, he was relatively young, but second of all, like, he was just so engrossed in chess that, I love that he just has, whether he's right or not, I just love the spirit of being disdainful of any other first move.
I mean, of course, he did mix it up, at the final stage where he, was clearly the best player in the world. He started mixing up his openings. I mean, played B3, C4, all kinds of stuff.
Famously springing C4 on Spassky. But yeah, I mean, it's just fun. His personality shines through a little bit with that. One other quote I had was where he's just giving a variation. So he says, objectively best is, and he gives a bunch of moves. And this is in Fischer-Bolbochan, 1962. Of course, caveat, obviously I'm pronouncing his name wrong. He says, but I was hoping to win in the middle game, so I didn't play that sequence that went to an end game. Ironically, I wouldn't have been awarded the Brilliancy Prize had I chosen the best line here. They don't give medals for end game technique. So yeah, because he got to end it with a nice.
That's very true.
Yeah, he got to end it with a nice combination. But if he had played objectively best, it wouldn't have happened. And you've got another quote here, Donnie. Do you want me to hop in and read it, or because they're pretty short? I don't know if you can freestyle them or not.
Sure. Well, the one I was thinking of and was in his game against Walther, which I found this to be one of the most interesting games in the book. This guy Walther, so this is in Zurich, 1959. He's described in the intro as, quote, a minor European master. So, this guy is not one of the stronger players in the tournament. He finished 14th out of 16. He made a few draws. He won a couple of games, but definitely Fischer's a lot better than this guy. And the quote is, but Fischer puts it in quotes, okay? He says, any resemblance to chess is purely coincidental. Now, that's a phrase that people, you seem to use around the chess clubs quite a bit. And I was curious more. I couldn't figure out who said it from looking on the internet, who it should really originally be attributed to. So if any of the listeners know, I think that would be great to find out. So what's interesting about this game is, I mean, Fischer really gets crushed. Like, he's just completely crushed by this guy. And a couple of times he mentions if the guy plays the move where there's many ways to win, but if he plays a move that indicates like he knows this winning plan, Fischer's just going to immediately resign because he has absolutely no counterplay. He can barely do anything, and it's over. But somehow Fischer manages to get to a bishop on opposite color ending where he's down 2 pawns. They are connected past pawns, and somehow he swindles the guy and he draws. And it's just sort of amazing to see because that is a very true to life game, right? Who hasn't had a game where they're playing someone much higher rated than them, and it just seems like, of course, you're going to win this game, and somehow the good player makes magic. Somehow you find something. So you really can see a lot in that game about Fischer's not giving up because, I mean, it's pretty awful. Like, he could definitely have resigned that game, and nobody in chess history would criticize him for it. But he didn't lose, so I guess that goes to show. Was that the quote you're thinking of, or was there?
Yeah, that was the one. You also have a couple quotes from Tarrasch and a couple things from Brady, just from your extra credit reading that you did.
Oh, well, glad to get credit for that. I think I said Spassky's quoted as saying, "When you play Fischer, it's not a question of if you win; it's a question of if you survive." Which, yes, I guess probably most listeners know this, right? And we sort of touched on it when we were talking about the interzonal. But Fischer famously is playing every game to win, no matter what the tournament situation is. Now, I mean, I'm sure he did consider the tournament situation in some more extreme circumstances, but basically he's playing every game to win. Just so I like that one. And yeah, I think that's it for the direct quotes. Did you have any more?
No, I think that pretty much covers it. And I wanted to get into some more, just mention a few more games. I mean, there's so many. One other note I just wanted to add that I forgot to mention earlier about the Fischer-Botvinnik game was that Fischer refuted Botvinnik's like home cooking over the board. I mean, so earlier in the game, Botvinnik had this line that he'd prepped for months and he'd been looking at with his team of seconds. And Fischer found this this intermezzo where he puts his queen, like a kamikaze queen move that queen takes f4, where he basically refuted the opening over the board. And that again shows, and that was not a preparation case. That just shows sort of his ingenuity and his trust in his own instincts. So much,
cool.
His opening play is definitely, even now, like now it's not as striking, but it was so far ahead of its time.
Yeah, he claimed in the book that he played, I think you may have, I don't know if you mentioned it, like he just played the Grunfeld on the spur of the moment.
Yeah.
Fischer has this reputation that like these super big games that he plays the Grunfeld. It's probably an artificial narrative being imposed because he won the game of the century against Donald Byrne with the Grunfeld defense. But it's just funny that he's like at the spur of the moment going to whip out the Grunfeld. You would think that would be, or maybe he mentioned the glint in Botvinnik's eye, that he's prepared for the King's Indian. I mean, it's just funny, right? It goes to show it's part science, but part art. He just felt like playing this, and he did it.
Yeah. Gotta admire it. So a couple other of my favorite games, and of course it's very hard to pick. Although as I mean, we should mention, I didn't feel like every game that was in the book needed to be. It could have been 52 most memorable games, or 52 memorable games, excuse me.
Wow, fighting words.
But there's some amazing ones. And one of my favorites was Fischer-Geller in 1959. So this is a lesser known dragon, lesser known than Fischer-Larsen, which is not saying much, but another opposite side castling game. There's so much sort of swashbuckling chess in this book. And this one, Fischer surrendered his dark squared bishop voluntarily, which is basically sacrosanct in any sort of dragon structure. And it subsequently hasn't really held up well. Like the engine calls it a mistake. Kasparov did like a video analysis of it, and he said basically it was great for its surprise value because it was an opening novelty at the time, but it's not objectively a good move. But it sort of underscores Fischer's willingness to challenge orthodoxy, and his willingness to trot out his own ideas. And obviously, when you're super genius and you're obsessed with chess 24 hours a day, why wouldn't you trust your own ideas?
Maybe I'll read the note that because he mentions what other contemporaries said about it.
Oh yeah, with Kotov, yeah.
Yeah, he wrote, Bronstein was so impressed with this concept that he enthusiastically gave my 13th move 2 exclamation marks, claiming it was virtually the winning line. Alexander Kotov, the Commissar of chess criticism in the Soviet Union, wrote with more sober restraint, "It is difficult to agree with this."
Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, and I think on the engine, just to give listeners some context, it's like more than a 1 point swing. This move, like it's by modern standards, it's not judged so well. But I mean, he crushed the guy. So what's more important,
Yeah. Well, fair point.
And he had a good line in the analysis of this game. He has another rook takes h5 sacrifice. He actually missed one a few moves earlier in this game, so he had a absolutely devastating rook takes h5. Similar, for those not familiar, this is a Sicilian dragon structure where you pawn storm the king side, and the knight on f6 when you play g5, it gets displaced to h5, and if you have the h file open, you give up your rook in order to open up the g file. So he famously did this in the Larsen game, but then here in the Gligerich game, he also plays rook takes h5 and says, "I've made this sacrifice so often, I feel like applying for a patent." What
are the games you don't like, by the way? If you have a list, I don't know if you.
I don't have a list because they're not as memorable. I mean, there was none that I just hated. It was more just in my not as thorough as I would like it to be sort of second reading. There were some books that just didn't, some games that just didn't resonate with me this time around.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't like the Olafson game, which I think I already mentioned. I don't know. I used to try. I played the King's Indian, and I decided I was going to learn to play the King's Indian by playing over all of Fischer's games with the King's Indian. But then I soon discovered that Fischer basically got a horrible position almost every game that he played the King's Indian, as far as I can tell. And so he's really not such a great model for the opening, but he was a great fighter. And in this game, he was just worse. And also, I've been worse in that same way so many times. But there are also games where it's there's a few games where it's a one-move blunder. I think the game where Fischer first plays the exchange Ruy Lopez, I mean, that's a very interesting game because, he's bringing back this opening that no one's played for a really long time. But the game is decided by a one-move blunder, basically, shortly into the game. So I guess you could also note the title of the book. It's a little, is it just he wanted to have a cooler title than My Best Games of Chess? Or is he, in naming it My 60 Memorable Games, is he making this distinction about that these are his memorable games, most memorable games, even though he called it memorable, not most memorable, as opposed to his best games? And you see a lot of games from the early period, which is clearly, the period where he's the most impressionable. He first goes to Europe. So perhaps that could explain some of that, right? He plays this exchange Ruy Lopez for the first time, so he's excited about it. So even though the game may not have that much meat in the end, it's still a very memorable one for him. But I guess I'll leave that to others who probably have more insight in that respect.
Yeah, it's so hard to say. It's so hard to say just because, I mean, any book writer will tell you that sometimes they don't get to decide the title. And this one in particular, it had so many titles along the way. That when it was 52 games, it was going to be called something else. So it's really hard to say. And it's funny that I always reflexively call it my most memorable games, because to me that makes more sense. I mean, of course, Frank Brady, as mentioned, and others have mentioned, Fischer had an amazing memory, as do most top players. So the idea that he would only have 60 quote memorable games is absurd. So most memorable makes more sense. So it is a strange wording.
Well, it sort of implies that the other games were not memorable, right? These are the 60 memorable ones. And then the other games are therefore not particularly memorable. I don't know if that's probably not actually the case. But at least that's what one person I discussed it with was their view. I don't know if there's any other games that I would take out. There's some like the knight h3 against the in the Italian game, if you know what I mean, e45, knight f3, knight c6, bishop z4, knight f6, knight g5. And then when white gets the chance to retreat his knight a few moves later, and this, of course, is depending on the audience knowing this opening, he puts his knight on h3. The computer hates that. And if you look at it with a computer and you look at the notes, then he just looks really dumb. I mean, those are the games that I think if you play it over with it, there are some games like that, where if you play it over with the computer, then his notes look particularly dumb. And probably that's why I hate the Olsen game. I hate it's a little strong, but the point is, if you play it over with the computer and every move he thinks he's somewhat better and trying to win, and the computer thinks that it's one pawn advantage for his opponent, it seems a little bit silly. But I don't know. Most of these games are wonderful. I mean, Rossolimo game, I don't think I appreciated when I was a kid, but I know for sure it gladdens the heart of all chess players when knight goes back to its original square. So he plays in a wild position, whereas king's, it's a McCutcheon French, his king's kind of in the middle of the board. He plays knight g1 from f3, so he can get it to h3 and then to f4. That's certainly a terrific game. That also the Simul game, the exhibition tour game, is also a very good game, which I showed the kids a lot. Against Selly, if I'm pronouncing his name right, probably not, but that's certainly a terrific game. So I don't know if there's anything that I would really take out of this book.
Okay, fair point.
But history will forgive you. The listeners will forgive you, Ben, for this sort of heretical view that I mean, one thing that really, I always felt a little bit dirty because I read this version of Alekhine's games it was included in some of, I think it was Nunn's edits and comments. But what I felt dirty about was they cut out like a lot of the games. Like if you were to go back and look at Alekine's original multi-volume Best Games of Chess. So I guess that's just a way of sort of reiterating that we shouldn't make changes to this book, which is, I think you may have mentioned that when Batsford tried to reprint it originally in Algebraic, they made a lot of changes, and people hated that, especially Fischer.
Yeah.
I mean, what he said about it probably was, a little bit influenced by mental illness. Like, it was probably not a conspiracy to make him look dumb because they made some mistake in a variation. But nevertheless, we'll leave our classics alone.
Yeah, I think that lesson was definitely learned, so that now I read the Kindle version and now it's reproduced verbatim, except there was like an end of a game that what that was in the book was wrong, was not what was played. So they fixed stuff like that, but they no longer tried to correct any analysis or anything like that.
That's fair enough. One game I'm a little bitter at is this game 21 against I'm probably mispronouncing this thing too, but Letelier, which there's a queen sacrifice.
Yeah.
It's a very attractive game, but what a weird idiosyncrasy Fischer had in his King's Indians is he didn't like to play d6. He would let white play, if you can imagine a position with a white knight on c3, pawn on c4, pawn on d4, pawn on e4. Usually you make your move order so that white can't play e5. But he would allow that. And he thought it was terrible, and I think the computer does not prefer that move, but it's not like a losing blunder or anything. I mean, so like, I remember I had it as black once, and I was expecting to, win in style. I think this was an simul against Anatoly Lane, and I did not win in style. So that's something that has stuck with me. So you can tell from that I would, copy this book as much as possible, which I think in most cases would have turned out well.
Yeah, I was a King's Indian player when I read this book in my teens too. And yeah, I had similar experiences where I would just, I love the idea, the romance of a well-played King's Indian, but my positions were also just, they didn't turn out that way as often as I would like.
I mean, I think it's got to be unsound, right? I mean, the computer knows better than me, obviously, but I was won over to that camp of, I think Larson wrote in How to Open a Chess Game, basically said it's unsound opening.
Yeah, I mean, you don't see it very much at the elite level, but shout out to Kostya Kavitsky. I am in front of the show. I know he's still keeping it real with the King's Indian. So, I mean, certainly up to the non-super GM level, if you know your stuff, you can make most openings work.
Don't get me wrong. I still play it every game because I don't know what else to play.
Right,
but I never feel good about it. So
yeah. So another favorite game of mine was Fischer and Geller. Geller, of course, one of the few people who has a positive score against Fischer, and this being one of only 3 losses included in the book, and it's a miniature. It's one of the only games that Fischer loses. I mean, that I can remember Fischer losing like in less than 30 moves. I mean, and it's another opposite side castling Sicilian sort of Firestorm type game, so just a lot of fun. And Fischer was playing a great game, and he just made a blunder. He, like you mentioned earlier, just missed a move at the end, missed a tactic that most times he's gonna see, most time a super GM is gonna see. But Geller managed to turn the tables on him, and he actually had some great analysis in this game. Of course, we've dinged him a little bit for like engines not agreeing, but in this case, there was one, like as you mentioned, highly tactical line, and I checked it with an engine, and it was just spot on. And one of the things I liked about this book, other than just the mere fact that he includes losses in his book, which at the time that this was published was pretty rare, but after blowing this game, his closing quote to the game is, quoting Tarrasch, he says, "It's not excuse me. He says, "It's not enough to be a good player. You must also play well."
Yeah, that's absolutely true. And most people, one of my worst weaknesses, but I think it's a lot of people have this problem, is I tend to play to the level of my opponent a little bit. So if you're playing someone lower rated, it's pretty easy to let your guard down. And that's something Fischer was particularly good at. Like, if you were to look at the cross tables from his career, you'll see that he's really crushing the bottom of the field a lot of the time, right? And that's obviously, it's a lot easier to get points from the people at the bottom than the people at the top. All these great quotes from Tarrasch. I guess, when I was reading some stuff about like what are the great chess books, critics' commentary, they always mention Tarrasch. Maybe you should have someone on to talk about his work. I had never read any of his books.
Yeah,
I'd love to hear about it.
I'm not a big Tarrasch scholar. Donnie, I got to throw in when you talked about playing to the level of your opponent, that's how I managed to draw you twice, even though you deny it.
No, I don't deny. I only remember one of the games.
Okay.
And there was a sort of an odd moment in the game that I think we've talked about, which was, it's like the end of the game. I was higher rated. What did you play? You played like
Budapest against you once.
Yeah, Budapest, I think. So, but we're getting to the end of the game. It's like a king and pawn ending, and I see that it's going to be like stalemate, the next move. This is in a Scholastic tournament, like 100 years ago. And so I offered you a draw, and you said no with such incredible disdain, which was just strange, because then it's like you say no, like bang the clock or whatever, like looking at you like I'm an idiot, and then it's like stalemate on the board. So, I don't know. And then this other game you may have made up. I'm not really sure. I mean, can you say where it occurred?
Well, I played you once. Sorry, listeners, but I played you once at an amateur tournament, like the U.S. Amateur East, and then once at a Nationals, I think.
Yeah, the game I'm referring to is at the Nationals.
Okay, yeah, no, I played you at an amateur once, and we also drew. I don't remember the opening.
This is a little bit different because you definitely made one draw, but I have noticed a tendency of people to make up draws. Like, several people that definitely never made a draw with me have told me they made a draw with me. But it's not just from... I also, for example, when I was reading all the stuff about Fischer, I came upon Walter Shipman's name, who was the only person to make a draw, for example, with Fischer in one speed tournament. And the first thing I thought to myself was that I had made a draw with him. But then I saw more about it, and I realized I never made a draw with him. Every time I played him, he crushed me.
That's funny, because I think I made a draw with Walter Shipman.
Yeah, you may have, you may not have. Right. People have this thing where, like, if they played someone a long time ago, a few times, they throw in a draw somehow. But it's possible. I mean, I have no recollection of it. But,
all right, we won't torture the listeners any longer. Okay, so moving on to one more favorite game of mine, and this is another super famous one. I talked about it when I interviewed David Howell not that long ago, the Fischer-Benko game, which of course is mainly famous for one move where he plays rook to f6 to prevent black from playing f5 and then mates him on the king side. In my intrepid internet research, I discovered a few cool things on this. So first of all, Fischer saw this like way in advance, which is not surprising. But Jeremy Silman, in his extremely critically acclaimed biography of Benko, has a quote from Benko. So, I mean, this game is like another one that many chess teachers over generations have been showing their students, and a very sort of evocative idea of interference, the chess tactic interference. But Benko says, everyone thinks that this rook f6 game against me was something special, but I don't know what's so great about it. I was exhausted for this game. I was up all night necking in a car with a young lady, kissing and kissing, but it didn't go beyond that. So the combination of no sleep and frustration led me to losing badly to Bobby. So,
all right, fair enough, I suppose.
Yeah.
It is a good game. The other game against Benko was not correct according to the computer, most of it. But the game you're talking about was basically Fischer was always better, like much better. And that was also one of the games where they mentioned this like winning the minor exchange.
Yeah, I was going to mention that. I love that. Yeah. Fischer really liked his bishops, so it goes bishop g4 takes f3. When Fischer recaptures, he says, "Oh, now I've basically saying I won the minor exchange. I have a material advantage here." So it's interesting to see that. You're probably a lot more up than me on what like Alpha Zero and Leela think about bishops. My impression was that they like bishops quite a bit. Yeah, I mean, Larry Kaufman, of course, famously gives bishops, one of the world's foremost chess computer experts, and if you have the bishop pair, it's worth like close to a full point, in terms of evaluation. So Fischer was definitely ahead of his time in terms of his bishop appreciation.
Interesting. I would say, though, when you're teaching, I've noticed when people are teaching kids, sometimes these kids are taught like a bishop is 3.5 points. This is my 2 cents, so the audience can rebel. But I think that's insane. Like, when you're dealing with little kids, like, this is not precise. So I wouldn't pollute their minds with that idea.
Yeah, I've pursued that exact line of questioning with a few guests, and it hasn't gone very far. But I agree, it's not worth explaining the difference. I think even possibly even beyond to little kids. I mean, it's good to know as an adult, but it's not likely, going to decide the outcome of a lot of lower club level games.
Yeah. There's a lot of other great books. There's like Fischer Neidorf with which is an H3 against the Neidorf with Neidorf playing black, which was like a total crush.
I think he might have given himself an exclam for H3 too. Like just, like on move 5 or whatever, move 6, No. Any other?
I mean, you have to enjoy yourself. Sorry.
Any other games, Donnie?
I think that's pretty much it. I mean, there's so many that you could mention.
Yeah,
I do find all his losses interesting. So there was 3 losses. There was the Tal game that we mentioned. Then he lost to Spassky in this King's Indian at Mar del Plata, which you readers may know that. So it's a King's Gambit, and then Fischer was extremely unhappy with having lost this game. He was a lot better. Then he makes a blunder and he basically loses immediately. And then he wrote this article of us to the King's Gambit, which I guess he's now been proved correct. If I understood from one of the world leading theoreticians, Jan Gustafsson, in his show or on one interview, he was basically saying that it's over. If you and anyone can see that if you put it in your engine and you play the King's Gambit and black takes the pawn, like black is a lot better already. So Fischer was sort of proved right. And then the last loss, of course, is the win to Geller that you mentioned already. Although he does also beat Geller in spectacular style, and that's another game you could show to kids. You might see that I'm a little preoccupied with what to show to children, but I think there's also a lot of chess teachers out there, so they may appreciate that.
Are we allowed to reveal your son's name to our audience, Donnie?
Now you're causing me a lot of problems.
Okay. So
okay. Well, I named my son Magnus, but I think there needs some explanation. First of all, I wanted a name that was both a traditional name, like so when they go to get a job, like they have a normal name, but there's also a little bit unusual. Now, in the United States, Magnus is not a very common name. Maybe there'll be a huge chess boom, and there'll be tons of Magnuses. It was also one of the few names or actually the only name that me and my wife could agree on. But when I named him Magnus, I thought that I'm basically excluding him from the chess world, right? Because if he's going to actually be a chess player, then it's like an issue now that his name is Magnus, right? The other little kids might make fun of him, right? It's sort of like I'm resigning to myself to the fact that he is not going to be a chess player. And he may be a chess player, so I think he's not going to be world champion, which is, I think, an appropriate thing to mention in this particular podcast, because I always felt that every chess player's implied goal was to be world champion, right? And that's why Fischer was such an attractive role model, because he actually became world champion.
Right.
So I was interested in teaching my son chess, but based on playing with him, I get the feeling he's not going to be world champion. Okay, so once you're not going to be world champion, then it's kind of like, well, now it doesn't really matter, right? Like, what's the difference? What are you going to be, second, third? Like, it doesn't really matter anymore. So he'll just be named Magnus. Other people will appreciate that. It does come up, like when he was really little, and someone said something about Magnus Carlsen being chess world champion. He was like maybe 3. He said, "Is that me?"
Funny.
It was confusing to him. And also sometimes when I talk about Magnus, I mean Magnus Carlsen.
Right. Also,
and he does that.
Confusing.
Yeah, it could be confusing.
Yeah, I mean, one of the improvement, getting to your point about like if you're going to be world champion or not, one of the improvement takeaways I'd highlighted was like do the work and be obsessed. But then when I wrote that and I started thinking about it, I mean, that's obviously a sort of a theme throughout the book, is that Fischer is, I mean, there's no other word for it. He just absolutely obsesses over every game he plays. I mean, the notes are not excessive, but when he's describing a game, like he'll the Botvinnik game, he'll say, well, then I was studying it, 2 months later, and then I saw this, this, and this. Like, he just absolutely pores over his games, and obviously his general work ethic was well established, but it didn't lead to mental health for him. So it's not, I mean, chess players generally seem to be more balanced on the whole these days, but I mean, to reach his heights, it's tough to do that.
Well,
and have a normal life.
Sure. I mean, someone said maybe it was trash too. I'm not sure, but somebody said, of course, you don't have to be crazy to be world champion, but it helps.
Right. Yeah.
There's probably some truth to that. And I hasten to add to the listeners that I have another child, and we'll see what happens with her. So I'm not out of it yet. Okay.
Okay.
Because even though I can't be world champion, I would be extremely happy to have my child be world champion. It's even better, right? You don't even have to play the games.
Yeah.
it's just at the venue being praised by everybody. So
shout out to Henrik Carlson. Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah.
So
I don't know what standard to apply, but that's for her. But that's another question, I guess. I mean,
that's a whole separate conversation. In closing, what other improvement takeaways would you have, Donny? I mean, we've sprinkled a few in throughout this, but what else could we learn from an intense study of these games?
Well, I think that in general in life, there's no royal road to learning. And I know that sometimes it may be possible to practice or study in a way that's so dumb that you don't get anything out of it, but I doubt it. So I think the main thing is, if you're going to read this book, or at least the way I read it as a youth, is you have to play over every single note. And okay, I skipped a few in the Botvinnik ending because it was a little boring. Okay, Rook ending.
Yeah.
If it didn't ruin your life not winning that game, maybe not every nuance of the Rook ending would be interesting to you. But you got to play over every note. Now, okay, I guess there's a couple issues. Well, one is, why are we reading chess books at all? And I mentioned before that you have to study things you like. So if you like reading game collections, then that will be very useful. So I don't think you're going to have any problem with it. Now, it is true. I think one of your previous guests said people know more about chess now. That's true. But if you happen to like Karas for some reason and you play over his game collection, you have to be pretty strong before that difference in strength means anything. So I think that's why you'd read chess books. Because I know, for example, Nakamura, I think, was on your show. He basically said that he didn't read chess books, or at least that wasn't his primary tool for learning. And I can't say that there's a reason you have to read a chess book, because you have this machine that tells you the right move. So you can play a game and then see what the machine has to say. But nevertheless, I think most people would enjoy reading a book more than computer analysis. And there's a few things I would note. First of all, one is the computer analysis is correct in some kind of objective sense, but it doesn't mean that the evaluations it's giving are really right for your games. And what I mean by that is you could easily get a position where there is one line that's winning for you, some tactical line, and you have some messy position, and there's no reason to think that you would be able to find that line. So if all the other variations are losing for you, the computer is saying you're winning. But in a practical sense, if you got that position in the game, and of course you weren't privy to this analysis beforehand, what score would you really make? Would you make 100%? Would you make 50%? Would you make less? I think you would make less. So there's something to be said for having some kind of narrative explanation, and also to the point of the computer's moves. One thing I noticed a lot in reading this book in tandem with looking at the computer analysis was often the computer will give some very, very strange moves. And, for example, it'll just start jettisoning all material right away or something. And that's because it sees some mate coming up. But if you are actually playing the game, you don't need to worry about the variation where the guy just starts giving up all his pieces, right? So you would then, this is an extreme example, but I think, so you might be able to figure out what's going on. But there's certainly a ton of situations where the computer sees everything, so it's playing some very, very strange moves that you don't care about, because in a practical game, they don't pose a problem for you. But you may need somebody to explain to you, unless you're going to really spend a long time going through all the computer variations, what is it that the computer is so afraid of? And that might be an example, a really obvious example would be, you sacrifice a piece. Well, in a practical game, you want to know, am I getting a winning attack, or am I getting a position, or maybe I'm getting a position where I'm getting the material back, or maybe I get some material, but not everything. But if you can see to a position where you got the material back, and you're doing well, and you know for sure you have that variation in hand, then that's really what matters from a practical standpoint, right? So if Fischer might say, and now I'm making something up, I shouldn't put words in Fischer's mouth, but he might say, well, I wasn't worried about this because I knew at least I had this variation. But if you put it into the computer, what you're going to see is like something that's very hard for you to understand. Now, obviously, it depends on your level of play, for sure, and also how much time you're willing to put in. But I guess this is a long way of saying that I think that this book and any other game collection by a super strong player is very worthwhile. Now, I should point out that Lombardi, for example, was not a big fan of notes. And what he told me I should do to improve at chess is play over every game of every world champion. And I made it through Morphy. He was a big fan of Morphy. And I didn't make it past Steinitz, which so that's not very impressive on my part. Although I did gain appreciation for Steinitz that I didn't have before, because I can't really see why I would just randomly play over Steinitz's games. So he didn't like notes because he said it really depends who's writing them. And obviously that's true. I guess the one note I remember discussing with him was some Alekhine note where Alekhine faced some eccentric move in the opening, and Alekhine's note as well. I faced this eccentric move, and that's why I had to play, to refute it, I needed to play this eccentric response. And he approved of that note, but cautioned me against all other notes. So I guess I think I said it all, but I would be absolutely shocked if somebody studied this book very, very carefully and they didn't improve a lot. That's for sure.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, and getting back to sort of the problem I had in trying to properly appreciate this in a month or review it in a month to get ready for this podcast, I do think it's the kind of book where the more you put into it, the more you get out of it, because I played through the book somewhat casually in order to just sort of make sure I finished it. And then a few of the games that I'd highlighted as my favorites, I then went back and looked at in more detail, and like definitely the more I dove in, the more I liked it. So, I mean, your philosophical question about chess books, I think you're right. They can't be 100% necessary anymore. But I think most people who listen to this podcast have decided that they like chess books.
Chess players are very interested in chess books. I've noticed that.
Yeah, although Jesse Cry, who obviously Grandmaster, who's been on the show a couple times, he's adamant that the younger generation, when I teach kids, they're closer to beginner level. So, we're not even getting to the point of discussing books much. But the like teenage up and comers, I'm sure he's teaching a lot of sort of, 1800 to expert to low master type players. He says he cannot get them to read chess books. So it may be kind of an academic question, I'm sad to report, for the next generation. But
they have no interest? Well, the thing is, people are still interested in Fischer, right? I mean, this is sort of a special case. There's no more famous player than Fischer, and the notes are not too brutal. And I mean, by the way, there are a lot of notes that you could skip if you wanted to, and I actually maybe you even should. And what I'm thinking of in particular is there are opening notes. Now,
that's a good point.
There are some opening notes where he's just giving another example of a game where he says, well, Kara's played this against me, and then he shows 20 moves of the game. I would definitely play over that because he's mainly trying to show you this other game. But if it's some, like, especially a sharp opening, I mean, you can certainly play over the moves, but you shouldn't be under, any illusion that that's correct. Like, for sure, all the opening analysis is not right. I mean, that's going to be true of certainly any old book.
Yeah, but it's also important to appreciate that, again, he'd done the work. Like, that's what framed his perspective, and that's why he knew what to do in this position, because he's not looking it up after the fact. He knew going in. Definitely I skipped over those sections, like any opening variation. I wasn't, I would look if he, depending on how bombastic he was in the description, I might take a look at one or two variations, but I generally wasn't gonna dive too deep. And yeah, I mean, and it's hard to even distill this into improvement takeaways, because I mean, so much of it just comes down to the moves. I mean, to the way he played. I mean, certainly he was an amazing calculator, which comes across, the occasional oversight notwithstanding, that comes across loud and clear, as you mentioned in the Botvinnik game, which had 14 pages of notes, and 14 pages devoted to the game in the original version. But generally, that's not a big insight. I mean, you just see how one of the greatest chess talents of all time thought. So of course that has value.
Sure. And I mean, there's a lot of, there's a romance to the game. And obviously this period of Fischer defeating all the Russians is one that people are still very interested in.
Yeah.
For whatever reason, they are. So I think for most people, that would be an additional plus factor that is going to cause them to really enjoy the book a lot.
Yeah, and just one or two more things to add. So Donnie, I think we had a little disagreement. What level player do you think could most benefit from this book?
Okay, with the disclaimer that I actually have no idea what these chess levels are. I said 1400 and up, or almost any rating, I guess. I know you think it's for somewhat more advanced players, but I would emphasize, Fischer, he really points out a lot of elementary tactics. It would not be unusual for him to say, not X because of, queen takes rook or something. Just pointing out to you a one-move tactic. Now, the reason he's usually doing it is because if not for that one-move tactic, then the move that he's criticizing would make strategic sense, right? So he's explaining the position by doing that. But nevertheless, if you're a less advanced player, that's very useful for him that he's pointing out all these tactics to you, and it'll be great practice. Now, if you're a 1400 player, how much is it going to help you? Even let's assume that all the notes were right in his ending against Botvinnik. How much would it help you to really play over every single note? Would you want to kill yourself if you tried to do that? Okay, maybe it would be a little bit heavy, but compared to most books, I mean, you're going to have, to me, it will really propel me forward in reading this book or any kind of game collection is a feeling of accomplishment of having finished a game. And, you're going to get that fairly quickly, because they're not too heavy, the notes. And I don't know. I think that's the case. Why, you think it's for more advanced players only?
I mean, I just think the variations are just so hard to see. I mean, so you'll get the feeling of, the main feeling you would get is just obviously he's calculating everything, that's important to appreciate. But if you're going to sit there, at all. What's that?
He constantly is saying I played this move. I thought it was going to be good. I wasn't sure.
Okay, but I mean, but when he gives a variation, I mean, when he goes off, and sets some trap or something. I mean, it's just so far down the line. Certainly. Yeah.
How are you going to become world champion if you don't play over these variations? I mean.
Yeah. No. I mean, but if you're going to be world champion, I'm just saying, instead of reading it when you're 1400, read it when you're 1800. I mean, of course you could do both, but there's a limited amount of time. But again,
what are you going to read instead? I mean, what book are you going to read instead? You're not going to read a game collection? It's fun to read a game collection. It's, it feels good to read it. You can even read it, by the way, this time I read it sort of in conjunction with Profile of a Prodigy, which again is a Fischer biography. And then you can see a little more context for each game, which I think something that you would like. But what are you going to study instead? I mean, my first book, I remember playing over was New World Chess Champion by Kasparov, which was an absolutely ridiculous book to be first book. And I definitely did not read that whole book. I mean, I guess you could read a book that's aimed at you could read Zurich 53, I guess. I mean, that's less variation.
Yeah, I mean,
that's another very, very good book that I read.
I don't know.
Very
I'm
carefully.
Thinking more of logical chess, move by move, and stuff like that. I mean, it's it's not as historical and might have a few errors, but it just explains more.
Okay, I mean, I don't know. I just remember I used to work at a chess bookstore, which used to be the Man Chess Club on 46th Street, and people would come in and they would sometimes ask what to buy. And one woman, very nice lady, who probably everybody knows from the old days playing chess, she wanted a book about strategy, as opposed to tactics, I guess.
Yeah, that's a common request.
Yeah, so my advice, not very original advice, was she should study Zurich 53. It seems like it was a candidates tournament, and every game is annotated. It's by David Bronstein. I know there's some controversy who wrote all the notes, but But I think everyone agrees that it's a good book, notwithstanding all the same caveats that you would give about computer analysis. And that book, there are sometimes variations, because sometimes you can only prove something with a variation, right, in a tactical position. But by and large, it's mainly prose analysis. So I would say read something like that. But I don't want to sound like I'm being critical of the book you mentioned, Logical Chess Movement, because I never read that book and I don't know what's in it.
Okay, and to be clear,
a magnificent book.
Yeah, and to be clear, I'm not saying it's objectively a better book. I'm just saying for someone around that level, I think it might be a challenge. But again, I mean, I just feel like generally people shouldn't be too, like, anyone listening to this podcast presumably is not like an 8-year-old future world champion. So, don't be too precious. Bobby Fischer wrote this book pretty close to the peak of his powers. Like, you should read it, whether it's the perfect study hack or not.
Yeah. I mean, okay. One other thing that comes to mind is that I don't remember exactly how you described it, but basically Lombardi suggests to me that sometimes the idea that you have a certain rating can hold you, like, mentally back if you think I'm X rating. I love the Zen mode, for example, on LiChess, because I don't want to know their rating. I don't want to think about the ratings. That's a good approach. But okay, I mean, if you buy this book and you find that it's too difficult, I mean, I guess that's possible. I mean, maybe my problem with Kasparov's books is that I just find them too difficult. I don't know what the hell he's talking about, and it's just too many. Like, it doesn't matter if one move is a little bit better than the next move. What practical significance is that? So you have to enjoy it. Some people definitely do enjoy truth in chess, and that's certainly legitimate. But
all right, well, I'm sure people are glad to hear I am elect, or possibly not I am elect Donny Ariel say. Even you, like, Kasparov's books are
I'm
tough.
not I am elect. As far as I know, I'm not an I am elect.
Listen, I never achieved the rating. I asked Kevin Go, who had been in a similar situation. He had the three GM norms, recent adult improver guest of the show. I said, is that called an I am elect or a GM elect? And he, as far as he knew, said yes. And I've done extensive Googling, and I'm yet to disprove it.
I got the opposite results. Did he have the rating?
No, he had the norms, but not the rating. He got his third norm and he was 7 points short.
Well, maybe you're right. I don't know.
I haven't found definitive. I'm gonna have to write a letter to FIDE to get to the bottom.
Well, I'm gonna have to start playing again now.
How many FIDE points do you need?
Well, I used to just need 11, but now I need something more than that. Maybe 25, something a little more, 28.
You better get cracking, Donnie. We're not getting any younger.
Yeah, it's a problem that I'm like a little weaker than I used to be. But actually, I was sorry. I know no one cares about this. The way to do it, if you're in a similar situation, is you find another old, washed-up player who has a rating, and then you play them a match. Right? That's the perfect way to do it.
Excellent. If any listeners out there are old, washed-up 2400s and want to play Donnie, give him a shout. Do him a solid. He's a good guy.
Please. Or if anyone wants to discuss filing Chapter 11, I'm also available for that.
Yes, bankruptcy lawyer, we should mention. Okay.
Yeah,
so, we're going to skip the quibbles.
So much,
yeah, we've gone super long. Just a couple housekeeping notes before we let you out of here, Donnie. You generously have refused payment. We have not entirely nailed down to whom the charity payment will go, but we'll figure it out. I'm hoping to do something chess and jails related. I feel obviously the American incarceration system is its own topic, and people in jail everywhere deserve great sympathy. And I think it's awesome when people pursue chess. So I'd like to find an appropriate charity for that, if you're okay with it, Donnie, but we'll figure something out. And I also, sorry, I'll let you have a turn in a minute. I just want to
No, please.
Okay. I also wanted to mention next month's podcast, we're going to go for a deep cut. I'm going to bring in yet another friend of the podcast whose voice I've never heard. Shout out to Jerry Wells. He's going to join me, and we're going to talk about the book Blindfold Chess: History, Psychology, Techniques, Champions, World Records, and Important Games by Elliot Hurst and John Knott. So, this is a big book. I've got my work cut out for me, as does Jerry, although he's already read it once and I have not. But, generally, we're just going to talk about that book, and also do some blindfold puzzles, give some blindfold tips, and just sort of put that in context, because I know it's a topic of some interest. So, Donny, sorry, what were you going to say?
No, nothing. I think you covered everything. Thank you so much, Ben.
Sure. Yeah. And listeners, one other thing, there's no blindfold puzzle this month. I apologize. We'll get back to that next month when we tackle blindfold chess generally. So Donny, thank you for your patience through our technical issues. Listeners, sorry if the Skype sounds a little worse, but this has been a lot of fun, Donny. I've been, since the day the podcast was created, I know that Jan Gustafsson and others have been waiting for your debut, and it did not disappoint.
Thank you so much.
Special thanks, as always, to my producer, Matthew Passy, and thanks to those who continue to help spread the word about Perpetual Chess. Positive reviews on podcast platforms like Apple Podcasts, glowing comments on YouTube help people discover the show, as does telling a friend or sharing it on social media. Speaking of which, you can follow me on Twitter. I'm at BennyFischel1, or join the Perpetual Chess Facebook group and continue the conversation about the latest interview. Sometimes the guests even weigh into these discussions. The Perpetual Chess Instagram page is back in action, so lots of ways to stay engaged, as they say. But most of all, of course, I want to thank those who provide financial support to the show, especially right now with all this COVID craziness going on in the world. Most of all, I want to thank Chessable for sponsoring the show, and to everyone who kicks in via PayPal or the Perpetual Chess Patreon page. I also just put up a little donate directly link on the Perpetual Chess webpage where it says donate. But again, if you're not in a position to donate, I'm happy to have people listening and just enjoying the show. So without further ado, I'd like to give thanks to the people who help make Perpetual Chess possible. I would like to give thanks to the following people and entities: Chessable.com, Quality Chess Books, the Capital City Chess Club, the Apprend Chess Twitch channel, Andrew Alhaji, Andrew Bach, Austin Clough, Benjamin Porteau, Bill Sigler, Kathy Carr, Chad Oliver, the Chess Central's Chess Blog, Chris Flanagan, Dan O'Hanlon, Danny Davidson, David Schreiber, I am Dimitri Schneider, I am Eric Rosen, Faraz Sawaf, Gary Foreman, Greg Harst, Greg Natel, Greg Shahadi, Guven Manet, James Kennedy, Jens Green, John Jernigan, John Rockefeller, John Cromarty, John MacArthur, Kelly Palmer, Kevin O'Callahan, Lucio Casada Silva, the law offices of Stuart Katz, LeelaAnalysis.com for cloud-based Leela engine analysis, Michael Can, FM Michael Oblin, Mike Zelazny, Mr. Mike Shahadi, the famous Mr. Dodgy, Peter Sodi, Reuven Fischer, Seattle Chess Club, Stephen Martinez, Thomas Stanix, Thomas Tachenko, Todd Bryant of Strong Chess, Todd Kennedy, Wayne Beam, and I also would like to thank the following: Aaron Waffler, Ace Vallega, Adam Ralph of ChessEngland.com, Adrian Gutierrez, Alex Pejas, Andy Ryerson, FM Andre Terakov, Dr. Andrew Perry, Anita Deer, Barry Hessian, Better Chess Training, Bill Juniper, Bill Moran, Brad and Andy Rosen, Brett Howard Lynn, Brian Mullis, Chad Hilton, Dr. Charles Snodgrass, Chris Wainscott, Christopher Baumgartner, Christopher Chabris, Chris Lott, Christopher Wood. I am Christoph Zalecki, aka Chess Explained, Coach Jay's Chess Academy, Costa Carras, Courtney Fry, Craig Mallon, Daniel Ginsberg, Daniel Naylor, Dave Saylor, David Bleskacek, David Cramley of Chessable.com, Dalen Shelton, Dirk Decker, Drake Domingue, Dwayne Edmonds, Ed Daly, Ethan Smith, Ian Mason. I am elect Donny Ariel, Fox Valley Chess Club, Francis Letarte Lavoie, Frank Tortoris MD, Gary Andrews, Gary Lewis, Geert Vanderveld, Gerard Barta, Giovanni Russo, Hans Schuh, Harish Srinivasan, Jacob Kovac, Jack Perry, James Aspinwall, James Bonastia, James Muir, Jason Woolham, Jaydeep Chakrabarty, Jeff Anderson, Jeffrey Martello, Yep Hoyland, Jerry Wells, Jim Ratliff, JJ Snod, Dr. John Fallon, John Fernandez, John Fontaine, John Hartman, John Jeffrey, John McMurtry, Jonathan Slater, Jordan Goodwin, Jose Rodriguez, Justin Gardner, Jen Shahadi, Joel Rocky, John Thompson, GM Josh Friedel, I am Kari Christensen, WGM Katerina Nemtsova, Kelly Palmer, Kevin Pryor, I am Kostyukovitsky, Krishna Gopalakrishnan, Kyle McAvoy, Larry Reiforth, Laura Boyowski, Martin Knudsen, Martin Krug, Matthew Passy, Matthew Tedesco of SeattleChessMeetup.org, Mechanics Institute Chess Club of San Francisco, Michael Allard, Michael Hudson, Miguel Arispide, Mike Clem, Mitchell Fabian, Nate Solon, Neil Bruce, Nigmat Mulajanov, Olaf Mueller-Michaels, GM Pascal Charbonneau, Pasi Passanen, Paul Bain, Paul Clarkson, Paul Sweeney, Paulo Santana, Peter Lux, Randy Temple, Ricky Grijalva, Richard Hallenbeck, Robert Turner, Roy Yearwood, Ryan Berg, the Say Chess YouTube channel, Scott Doherty, Scott McKinnon, Sebastian Finsterwater, Shane Unger, Stefan Roller, WGM Tatyev Abrahamian, Tim Brennan, Tim Seymour, Timothy Ha, Tom Edsel, Tomas Komanich, Tony Rotella, Tyrin Price, Vishnu Srikumar, William Brock, William Juniper, William Hogarth, William Peterson, FM Zhao Cheng of Chess1000.com, and last but never least, Zhivko Stoyanov. Thanks for listening, everyone. I will catch you all next week.